Let me say that it's an honor and a pleasure to be able to host you once again here in the auditorium of the University of Catania. First of all, I would like to warmly thank Giorgio Romeo and Sicilian Post, and that's a pleasure that in this land, which is Catania, there is this international workshop on journalism that is open to many young people with such important and relevant speakers. I would like to thank Giovanni Zagni, who's here from Pagella Politica, who's been here since the very first edition, so he's a constant and important presence, so thank you very much.
And let me also thank, I know he's here online, Professor Jeff Jarvis from City University, New York. Thanks for being with us once more for our students today. Grazie a tutti e a
Thank you all and have a nice day.
Grazie al magnifico rettore.
Thank you to our dean. I'd like to say hi to Mr. Jeff Jarvis, who is here with us through Zoom. He's professor at the Newmark School of the University of New York, and we will be discussing with him in these 45 minutes that we have, starting from his last book. Before delving into it, I would like to also thank the Consulate of the United States in Naples for the interpretation. You are not, the audience is not hearing us, but Mr. Jarvis is. So the book we're talking about today is a book that has recently been published by Professor Jeff Jarvis, just not that much time ago. He's supposed to be launched in 2023, and it's the Gutenberg Parenthesis, age of print and its lessons for the internet era. So it's a history book, but it's also a book of technology history, more specifically. It's a kind of path through centuries that starts with the invention of the print, the movable type in Germany, as we all know, and arrives to our days. The perspective of the book is to constantly wonder how the technological discoveries, and in this case around the print and the book, has shaped our way of thinking. I'll just give you an example of how these technological discoveries shaped our thinking. One that really stuck with me at the beginning of the book, even if the book is full of these insights. For example, the passage from the loud speaking and reading to mind reading, so without telling the words out loud. There's a scene where St. Augustine sees his master, St. Ambrose, and reads a book and says nothing. And he's impressed because ever since everyone that was reading was doing that out loud. So reading as writing were a social fact, something that happened in public. So this passage, this step, as Jarvis said, opens the way to having more revolutionary and transgressive thoughts, to put them on paper. So this technological step, if we want, has very obvious consequences in our way of thinking. But you're not here to listen to me, so I'll start with our first question. So, at the basis of the book, there is a very original perspective, which is this one. Today, we think that internet is a revolution that is introducing us to a new world. This is true in some way, but according to the book, it's more effective to consider another perspective, the one according to which the book age was a parenthesis, was an original period, a parenthesis of some centuries, of course, that is now closing and that will bring us back to a medieval world somehow. So, Professor Jarvis, first, I would like to thank you, of course, because maybe for the first time since I graduated, I wrote a thesis about it, and I feel I'm keeping up with this debate. But can you explain better the idea of a future that will be coming back to the past?
Thank you so much. I want to thank the Dean for that kind introduction. And for providing this amazing room where I wish I were in person. Giorgio has tried to get me to Sicily many times, and by God, we will succeed. And I will get there, I hope, next time. And thank you for that wise question. Well done. Yes, I do have the book coming out. I just got my first copies, so I will brag, as authors do, that I have one in my hands. The idea behind the book, the title, the Gutenberg Parenthesis, comes from three academics in the University of Southern Denmark, Tom Pettit, Lars Ole Sauerberg, and Marianne Borch. And they came up with this idea of the Gutenberg Parenthesis, in which they argued that before Gutenberg, before movable type, and please remember that movable type was also invented in China and Korea, but before Gutenberg and the invention that affected us in the West, language was passed around. Information was passed around person to person. It was changed along the way. There was little sense of ownership or authorship of this thing that we call content. The aim of the scribes was to preserve the knowledge of the ancients. The business model was pretty simple: one scribe, one book, one patron, a lot of time. And then comes Gutenberg, and things fundamentally change in our part of the world. And now we see the world as if contained inside a book. Things have a beginning and an ending. We value the story, the narrative. Marshall McLuhan would say that the line, and this sentence is an example, became our organizing principle for ourselves, a linear thought of the world. We no longer honor the ancients. We now honored authors and professors and academics and scholars. The business model finally became clear with copyright. And we started to see what we talked about as a thing we called content that fit inside a package that we called a book or a publication. And so that was our life throughout the Gutenberg Parenthesis. And what Pettit and Sauerberg and Borch argued is that now that we come to the end of the print age, and by the way, I'm not going to argue that the text dies or books die, but we come to an age when text and books become superseded somewhat by what follows, by digital, by the connected world, by data. So when that happens, they say, we have the opportunity to look back and in their argument, we recapture what was before. We don't lose what came in between, but we can also perhaps regain a sense of what life was like when the world was primarily conversational. When, once again, we're in conversation and the internet, that's what the internet is all about, in my view, is conversation. When knowledge is once again passed around click to click and it changes along the way for good and bad. When the business model is no longer clear and we argue about copyright, when things like the internet and AI come along, and when we no longer honor the ancients, and unfortunately today we don't honor the experts, but as my friend David Weinberger from Harvard has said, the smartest person in the room is the room itself. It is the network that connects us all. So in this, we have the opportunity to ask, what was the age of print? What did it mean to us? What institutions do we want to preserve and protect? What institutions need to be updated or eliminated? What institutions need to be created in this new world? I have a few lessons I'd just like to mention, and I'll come back to you, from having looked at this. In the first half of the book, I look at, as you said, the technology of print as technology. And what struck me first is the amount of time it took for this transition. That after Gutenberg in about 1450, the book didn't take on the form we know now with an index and page numbers and a table of contents and a title page. Those institutions in the book came a half century later, about 1500, at the end of what we call the incunabular, or the infant stage of print. It took a century and a half then, from 1450 to about 1600, before we saw really huge innovation with print. The invention of the modern novel with Cervantes, the invention of the essay with Montaigne, the invention of the newspaper coming out of the handwritten avisi that were so important in Italy, and the invention of a creation of a market for printed plays with Shakespeare. That is a century and a half, and that's really quite amazing to me that it took that long. When the technology got boring, when the technology didn't matter as much anymore, and when the creation with it mattered. Then after that, after 1600, the next major moment was 1710 with the creation of copyright, with the Statute of Anne in England. The next major innovations came about 1800, which was the first time that the technology itself changed in any marked way. Printing had been done very much the same all that time. 1800, we got steam-powered presses that went faster. We got paper that was made from wood, not just from cloth and linen, which made it much cheaper to do. We got a stereotyping, which duplicated printing pages so we could do that more. And then we got a miraculous machine called the linotype that produced print a line at a time. And I don't know if you can see this there, but this is a piece of type. When you think about it, for those first years from 1450 to 1800, or almost 1900, all text in the world was set one letter at a time, one small letter at a time. And then after it was set, it had to be taken out and cleaned. And if you wanted another edition, you had to reset the entire thing again. It was laborious. And so what happened with the mechanization and industrialization of print? Along comes the mass market and mass media. Before this mechanization, the average circulation of a daily newspaper in the United States was 4,000. It was the size of a Substack newsletter these days, right? And then along comes steam and machines and rolls of paper, and we have the penny press, and mass media are created, and everything that comes with that, good and bad. And I think much bad comes with that, which the public has assumed to be a mass. It's a way of forgetting about people. It's a way to not listen to people. It's a way to consider them just the object of our content and our media. So then a little bit later, around the 1920s, print gets its first competitor, its first real competitor in radio. And print didn't like it at all. And the newspapers fought radio to try to keep them out of our business. And then we get to the 1950s with television, of course. And then comes us today. And what did I leave out of that timeline, of course, was the internet. But the internet was only about, I marked the beginning of the internet in 1994 with the release of the first commercial browser that everyone could use. So we're a little more than a quarter century away from the beginning of the internet, which is to say that in Gutenberg timescale, it's about the year 1480. And we don't yet know, I don't think, what the internet is, what data can do, what artificial intelligence is, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. We're just trying to learn how to do this. We still see the future as a version of the past. We haven't reached that moment yet, I think, when we've invented the novel and the essay and the newspaper as entirely new forms native to this new world, which is to say that you have time, and you have a lot more time than I have because I'm old and you're not, and you are going to be the inventors and innovators who can invent a future and a new future for news. In the book, I look at a few lessons from the age of print to try to inform the judgments that we have to make now as we invent a new future. And I'll just mention a couple of them very quickly. One is that I think we pass from the idea of content back to conversation. That's going back in the parenthesis to a time of a society built on conversation. The idea of content is a Gutenberg era idea, a mass media idea. It is a commercial idea that it is a product that we have to sell. And I think we have to get past that. The dean mentioned artificial intelligence, and I think that's something that illustrates this to us. Because if you look at ChatGPT, and I know you've all played with it, and it's really quite amazing, what I think that it does is show us that writing isn't so special. Now, I'm afraid to say that in front of a room of journalism students because you're all learning how to write better, and writing still matters and stories still matter, but it's not the most important thing. The most important thing about journalism especially is service to communities, service to the public, improving public discourse by making it more informed and more intelligent and more productive and more inclusive. Those are the jobs of the journalist. Writing is just one tool that we have. Similarly, I look at the idea of the story as problematic in some ways. Like, again, I'm not killing the story. Learn how to write stories well. That is your job. That is the best tool you're going to have. But keep in mind that the story is a device of power. For the storyteller has the power to decide what the story is, who is in the story, who is not in the story, and how it begins and how it ends. And the story also brings the myth that there are neat beginnings and endings to things like the book. So we have to move past the idea and the form that we've always used and find new forms. And to my mind, this follows the idea of conversation and service, and that the form follows the service and value follows the service. And when we listen to the public and listen to communities, because we have new ways to listen that were not possible in the age of mass media when it was all one way. Now the world can speak and be heard. And now we have to learn better to listen. And when we do that, we have the opportunity to understand and know what communities need, and then to decide what journalism we can bring. The other lesson that I want to highlight is that mass media brought this idea of the mass, that people were kind of all one, or maybe at most split into two, left and right, red and blue, black and white, 99% and 1%. And we do a disservice to the public we serve when we assume that they are a mass. It is, as some scholars say, I quote in the book, that it is a way not to listen to people, not to respect them, not to understand them and hear them. And we have the opportunity now to see people in communities. I think that Twitter, for all its many problems right now under damned Elon Musk, showed us the power of community, especially in America with Black Twitter and what it brought. Very importantly, Black Lives Matter as a movement that served communities and people who for too long were not served in mainstream mass media run by people who look like me, old white men. And not just that, but also a place where people could be themselves, not under white gaze, and understand what their communities were and talk in their own languages and their own ways. This is the power that the internet brings, and this is the power that social media bring. And I also think that one of the powers of artificial intelligence, so-called, of AI, is that it might, I don't think we should get AI anywhere near fact-based journalism, because right now, in its present form, it doesn't do facts. And we know that. And it's a mistake to bring AI to search engines, and it's a mistake to bring AI to journalism, I think. In that form of trying to make things up and make up more content. The world doesn't need more content. It just commodifies us. However, I do think that there are other uses of AI that can be very valuable. I think that AI can expand literacy. And for those people who are intimidated by writing and by illustrating, AI can help them tell their stories rather than us extracting their stories. I think there's a lot of power in that they can use it as a tool of creation for their own ends, and we can include them in the larger public discourse. Last point. The dean also talked about fake news and the problems of disinformation. And one of the arguments about AI is, oh my God, it's going to make things far worse because there'll be more disinformation. We already have plenty of disinformation. We're already overloaded with disinformation. The fact that there's more of it out there doesn't concern me any more than what we have now. The problem is that we have to come around to building new institutions around quality information. One of my favorite stories in the book is that in 1470, there was what was said to be the first call for censorship of print. A translator in Italy named Niccolo Perotti was much offended by a translation of Pliny. And he wrote to the Pope, beseeching the Pope to appoint a censor to control the output of this new machine, the press, and to assure its quality. As I thought about it, I realized that Perotti was not asking for censorship. What he was asking for was the creation of the institutions that would follow, the institutions of editing and publishing, which would ensure quality and authority and reliability and constancy. And those institutions did follow. And print at first was seen to be very unreliable, less unreliable than what you heard from your neighbor, because when you knew your neighbor and knew who was reliable, you had more of a sense of what was true, and print could come from anywhere. Anyone could make it now. And it was seen as something that brought more disinformation into the world. But of course that changed. Well, now those institutions of editing and publishing are inadequate to the scale of speech that we have today, thanks to the internet. So you need to create the new institutions that will try to assure authority, reliability, truth, and quality in this age. That means finding the people who know what they're talking about, finding the experts, which is something we've always done. It means highlighting the voices that matter. It means adding facts and adding information to dialogue that needs it. It means that you've got to find quality and you've got to ignore idiocy. We're going to have to create new institutions, new mechanisms to do that. And it's not going to be technology. Technology will help us. In the end, it has to be us. And in the end, what we are doing is enabling the public again to make its own judgment. In the next book I'm writing about the internet, I've come across this wonderful concept I'd never heard of fama, F-A-M-A. In Latin, it means it is said, and perhaps you know this because it's closer to your language than mine, but I had never seen this before. And it's about the reputation that information has and those who share the information. And that in medieval times, people had to rely on their own knowledge of someone's past history. Did they tell the truth? Were they revealed to be a liar? Did they have special interests? What was their reputation? What was the reputation of what they said? We're going to have to return, I think, to a time when we are responsible as citizens to make those judgments. And as journalists, we have to do a better job of helping people make those judgments. In the end, in my book, in an earlier book called What Would Google Do, I said that we had to update the institution of the book, make it updatable and clickable and linkable and all kinds of. In this book, I say I was wrong, because I realized that the book itself is an institution that has endured. It's not going to go away. Print newspapers might go away. Print magazines might go away. Broadcast television might go away. But the book is an enduring institution, and it is the institution that we can judge ourselves and our progress against as we build institutions in the future. So sorry for that long beginning, but that's a summary to your kind question about my book.
Ci sono un paio di altre osservazioni.
Okay, there are a couple of other observations. One of the key concepts of your book is the one according to which we still haven't completely and fully understood the consequences of a technology such the internet. And I quote page 147 of your book, "We still cannot see all the possibilities of the network because we are connected to the past of a print culture whose vision of the world is still holding us tight to the idea of purpose, property and purpose, centrality and control. We must understand that culture and its history we need to understand what will follow in its culture and history. So you hopefully say that the future of the internet is not already written and will also depend on our choices. In the second part of the book, indeed, we go through the story and philosophy and sociology of media. And here in our audience, we have a professor that is a sociologist that probably would like to say something later. But here you list many choices that we will have to face. And the first one you already mentioned in your previous answer. Why in the world of today you see a big opportunity in going back to the dialogue? Because if I had to say something, I would say that it's more difficult now to dialogue because we all follow our friends, we have our ideas, and the fact that there is no more mass culture, as you wrote, also means that there's no more a common talk. There are many talks, many speeches, and generally they don't get along. While in your book, you sound quite optimistic. So I'm asking, give us something of this optimist.
So back there on my bookshelf somewhere is a thick book that lists all the publications that were printed in America in the year 1900. And in New York alone, there were dozens of newspapers. In fact, there stayed many, many newspapers until the strike over new printing technology came in the 60s, when the strike killed, I think, 9 newspapers. And now today in New York, we have one healthy newspaper, the New York Times, and 2 not very healthy, the New York Daily News and the New York Post. And it's very unusual to still have 3. If you go to most cities in the US, you have 1. Europe, of course, is different, where you have national media and you have competition, but we don't have that and haven't had that in the US because we're just so darn big. So I think that the time of the belief that we had a grand national shared experience was actually very brief. It was the age of television. In the United States, and it was a myth. In the United States, we had a TV news reader named Walter Cronkite. And every evening he would end his broadcast saying, "And that's the way it is." Well, to many of his viewers, it wasn't the way it was. If you were Black in America or Latino in America or an immigrant in America or LGBTQ in America, it wasn't the way it was for you because you weren't represented in this monolithic view of America. We also had a myth of what we called the melting pot, that somehow we would all become the same at one point, which was a way for white people to say that everyone would end up like us. And it would erase the culture and identity of people themselves. So I celebrate the noise that we now hear, for it is the noise of democracy. It is the noise of a more accurate view of the world. I think we gave a very bad mirror to the world in journalism of the past. We convinced everybody that there was kind of one way to look at the world, and it was ours. There's many ways to look at the world. And I think we made things look very negative in the world because what we report on is the things that are bad that are happening. Most important, we presented a very limited scope of who could speak, and now many can speak. And so I think that cacophony, that noise of democracy is the natural state of things. The limited time of mass media when newspapers were killed by television, when there were very few voices who could be heard, was an unnatural state of media. But the problem is, we as a society have forgotten how to hold a conversation with ourselves. And so we see the results of that now. We see people who think they've been silenced all these years, who now want to scream and shout from the mountaintop whatever they want. We have lost, I think, some ability to understand how to treat each other and listen to each other. But I do have hope that we can recapture that. I think we have to get over something bad, but who knows? The same thing happened with print. If you look back at the early days of print, it was highly conversational. Martin Luther was in debate with the Pope and their books and the burning of their books. Erasmus with Thomas More in England. and so on and so on and so on. And it was a time of obviously great division and rancor, thanks to the Reformation. I was at the wonderful Perugia International Journalism Festival a few years ago, before the pandemic, and I was debating a German regulator, which was a lot of fun. And I said that after print, we had to go through Peasants' Wars and the 30 Years' War and the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation. And I said, perhaps there's a 30 Years' War ahead of us. And the German regulator scolded me, and he said, 1 million people died in the 30 Years' War. It is too soon to joke about that. A few centuries, okay. I hope we don't go through a 30 Years' War. I hope we have learned from these past experiences. I hope we learn how to hold a conversation. But I don't think we should look at the internet today as the internet forever. I don't think that just as Netscape was not forever and MySpace was not forever, I don't think that Facebook is forever or Twitter is forever, Lord knows, or even Google is forever. The internet, we have to recapture as ours. And I think we went through a period of it being taken over by big corporations. And I think that probably Elon Musk did us a favor by showing us the peril of that, the risk of that enabling one narcissist to take over that company and have an impact on all of human discourse in the United States is a mistake. And so there's new technologies. The technology isn't the solution. The solution is human. But we have Mastodon, we have Blue Sky coming, we have other mechanisms that can't be taken over. And so I think we're going to have to re-examine the very architecture of the internet and the architecture of media, and to see where we go. But the decisions are ours, and we can screw it up. You asked me for optimism. I have optimism, but I also have pessimism, because we don't know which way it's going to go. And the responsibility is ours. Every day, with everything we do on the internet, we make what the internet is. We decide what it is. When we enjoy people having a big fight, we want an internet of fights. When we highlight smart, useful, productive things, we will have a smart, useful, and productive internet. That is our responsibility, especially in media, also our responsibility as citizens. So the optimism comes from the idea that print was very divisive, brought along or enabled wars and revolution, but eventually we figured it out, and I think we'll figure it out again. When I hear AI people say that it's going to lead to the destruction of all mankind, it's just absolutely ridiculous. It's just them trying to say how powerful they think they are. That's not going to be the case. Could we screw it up? Absolutely. Have we screwed these things up in the past? Of course we have. But I think that in the end, our mutual self-interest will make us figure this out.
Grazie per questa risposta.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this very complex answer. We have 10 minutes left, so I think that we can have 2 questions from the audience, if we have a couple of questions, as I hope the professor, the sociologist, has one. So these short question and answers, because we don't have much time left. Thank you. Thank you. So, Professor Jarvis, you did an amazing speech, and you said that print has created division. We know that. And it was very close to internet, I think. Times are different, of course. Print allowed people to express with a written long content on a book their opinion, creating, of course, divisions, but the time of writing, the time of reading create larger communities. Now internet is doing the same thing in real time, so everyone can say what they think without criticism, because there's no time to assess these opinions. And instead of creating, for example, religious wars, as it happened, they create echo chambers and a political and social chaos that we've seen since 2016. So I want to ask you if you trust a system that can solve itself with that many different opinions.
I think it's a great question, and thank you for that. we're not at that answer now. We have to invent new institutions and new services to help people do a better job of that. Because right now, all we get is this raw, everyone is speaking at the same time. And that's difficult to get our heads around. But let's remember with print, it didn't only make books. It also made pamphlets and news pamphlets and broadsides and ballads and Malleus Maleficarum, the book that led to witch hunts and killing witches, and broadsides that made people blame women for lightning in their towns. We had misinformation. We had a lot of problems with print too, until we created those institutions that didn't publish the bad and emphasized the good. I think we have to do similar things now. And the advantage is, again, that we have populations of people who were not heard, who always had voices, but who were not heard in the old structure, who can now be heard. And what we have to do in media is to value their voices. The other thing we have to do, since I think I'm talking to the sociologist, am I? Is we have to bring the humanities into the discussion. We have let the technologists take charge. And I've especially seen this when it comes to AI, because the people who, Peter Thiel and Sam Altman and Elon Musk and other people who are involved in AI have a really strange belief system called long-termism, in which they think that our obligation is not to today, but to the far future. And it leads them to do all kinds of crazy things. Well, this, I think, comes in part from leaving the technologists in charge. In the beginning of print, who was in charge? The printers, the ones who could control the machinery. But soon enough, that left. Soon enough, others took charge. New institutions and new specialties arose. You know, it's ridiculous to think that Facebook, a service that tries to connect human beings with each other, is run by technologists. It should be run by sociologists. Google should be run by librarians if it's there to organize the world's knowledge and make it useful. I think we have to demote the technologists. They're still necessary, just like printers are or were, but we have to bring the other disciplines into a valued relationship to try to have an impact on how we have these conversations.
It's very interesting, your answer, but I want to be simple. Where did the public opinion go? So where did your public opinion go?
Excellent question. Was there ever a public opinion? I think that was part of the myth of mass media and the myth of the polling industry, the opinion polling industry. James Carey, who was a brilliant professor at Columbia, has written that the opinion poll cuts off the conversation it is meant to measure, because it brings the biases and presumptions of the pollster, who decides what buckets to put people into and what priorities to have. And it takes away all nuance from public conversation, that everyone becomes yes or no, black or white, red or blue. And I think what is actually happening is that a system that isn't built for nuance is having to deal with the fact that everyone and their nuance can now speak. And we also can't deal in media and journalism with asymmetry, because we've had this myth that there are always two equal sides to everything. Now, clearly that's wrong when it comes to climate change, and we've been properly scolded for having a pro and anti-climate change, but it's certainly true in the United States with our political system, and I imagine in yours as well, because we have Trump, who is insane, fascistic, lying, corrupt, and what media try to do is to make the other side somehow equal. So for every scandal of Trump, we have to have one from the Democrats, whether it's Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden. So the New York Times said about Hillary Clinton, but her emails. They say about Joe Biden, but he's old. They've always got to find some negative to equal things. They cannot deal with an asymmetrical playing field. That is nuance. And even at that high level, media are very bad at dealing with that. It's much, much harder when now you can hear in the United States different communities, not just one community, but different communities within Black America, very many communities within Spanish-speaking America, very many different communities and different views within gay America, and so on, and so on, and so on, and so on. The world properly conceived is full of nuance. And look at it this way too. Go back to this idea of the container. We try to put everything in a container. We think everything can be a story with an alpha and an omega. And the real world is like a weblog or like Twitter, a story that never begins and never ends, that is filled with links to everywhere, that is confusing and complex and difficult to get our heads around. That's the way the real world is. The myth of media was that we could control that, explain that, and contain that. That's what we have to get over.
Grazie mille.
Thank you very much.
Una conclusione perfetta anche questo scambio finale, perché
A perfect conclusion, because now I'd like to ask the audience to close to Cecile. I would like to thank Mr. Jarvis. Of course, we want you to be here with us next year in Catania so that we can do this face-to-face, because the opinion exchange looked very, very promising.
E a questo punto invito